So here's a thing I've always found quietly funny about Avatar: The Last Airbender. The main villain, the big bad the whole 100-year war is pointing towards, is barely in it. For most of 3 seasons, Ozai is a shadow on a throne, a wall of orange fire, a voice with no face attached. You wait ages to actually see the man properly, and when you finally do, he's oddly small for someone the entire world is meant to be terrified of. I've been turning him over in my head for a while, because there's this German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who died back in 1900, decades before anyone drew a single frame of this show, and somehow he'd already written the manual on exactly this kind of person. Not the cartoon, mind you, the type. That's what we're doing tonight. A slow wander through Ozai, and through a man with a truly enormous moustache who'd have found him horribly familiar. No rush, nowhere to be. If you fancy more of this sort of thing, the subscribe button's down there somewhere. Right, let's take our time. Think about how the show actually introduces him, or rather, how it doesn't. Ozai is the ruler of the most powerful nation on the planet, the man every single character is, in one way or another, running from or running towards, and the writers keep him almost entirely off the screen. When he does turn up in the early seasons, he's shot from behind or from below, half swallowed by shadow, with a curtain of flame between him and everyone else. You get a jawline, you get a low voice, you don't get a face. I love that choice, honestly. It would have been so easy to give us a big snarling monster in the first episode. Let us boo him. Get it over with. Instead, they let him sit in the corner of your imagination and grow. By the time you finally see the whole of him, sitting there in the firelight, you've built him up into something enormous, and the show is quietly betting that no actual man can live up to the version you've assembled in your own head. Which, when you think about it, is a very clever thing to do with a villain whose entire deal is being larger than life. And here's a fun detail that never stops delighting me. Ozai is voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, that Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself. Though by the time he's doing Ozai, he spent years being one of the great cartoon voice actors, best known for playing the Joker. So the Fire Lord of the Fire Nation is being performed by the same bloke who voices Batman's arch nemesis, which is a lovely bit of trivia to keep in your back pocket. He gives Ozai this smooth, patient, almost bored menace. Nothing is rushed. He never raises his voice when a quiet one will do the job. That patience is the scariest thing about the performance, I think. Let me place him in the family, because a lot of who Ozai is comes down to where he sits in it. He's the second son of Fire Lord Azalon, the younger brother of Iroh, who we'll spend proper time with later, because Iroh deserves it. He's the father of Zuko and Azula, the ex-husband of Ursa, and the grandson of Fire Lord Sozin, the man who started the whole war 100 years earlier. So Ozai isn't the founder of anything. He inherits a war that's already 3 generations old. He's a link in a chain, the latest in a line of people who decided the rest of the world would be better off on fire. The thing that gets me is that being the second son should have meant almost nothing. In a system built on succession, the younger brother is the spare. The throne was never really meant to come to him, and yet, by the time we meet him, he's not just Fire Lord. He's about to crown himself something even grander. How he got there is a genuinely dark little story that the show doles out in pieces across the seasons, and we'll get to that too, because it explains an enormous amount about the man. For now, I'll just say that Ozai's rise was not the natural, obvious kind. He had to reach for it. He had to want it in a way his older brother apparently never did. Here's a strange fact that I find says everything. Ozai has the shortest reign of any Fire Lord we know about in the whole history of that world. He's only actually in charge for a comparatively brief stretch, and in that short window, he becomes the single most powerful ruler that world had ever seen, controlling something like 8/10 of the entire planet. Sit with that for a second. The Fire Nation itself, colonies stretched all across the Earth Kingdom, captured capitals like Ba Sing Se and Omashu. Even old air nomad territory turned into Fire Nation bases. Most of the world, under one man, in a reign shorter than most of the people who came before him. That's not the record of a patient empire builder. That's the record of someone who came in late and pushed everything to the edge as fast as he possibly could. There's another little detail I can't resist because it tells you how the show quietly frames him. Over the course of the series, Ozai meets only a couple of members of the core group at some point. He faces Aang. He looms over Zuko. He's in the same rooms as Aang and Zuko by the end. But there's one person he never actually crosses paths with, and it's Katara. I don't know if that was deliberate, but I like reading meaning into it anyway. Katara is the emotional heart of the group, the one whose whole arc is about care and connection, and refusing to let go of people. Ozai is the exact opposite of all that. Maybe it's fitting the two of them never share a frame. The man who understands nothing about love never has to stand in front of the person who understands it best. What I'm getting at in this slow roundabout way is that Ozai is built as an absence, a gap in the shape of a tyrant. He's less a character you get to know and more a force the whole world is bending around. And that's unusual, and it's a bit of a risk because absence can read as thinness. Plenty of people watch the show and come away thinking Ozai is a flat villain, a cardboard cutout of evil with no inner life. I understand why. He doesn't get the redemption arcs and the tearful backstory beats the others get. He doesn't sit down for tea and confess his feelings. But I've come round to thinking the flatness is the point, or at least that there's a lot more going on underneath it than people give the show credit for. Because the philosopher I mentioned, the one with the mustache, spent a good chunk of his life describing a very particular kind of person. A person who looks from the outside like the pinnacle of human strength. Someone beyond the rules, beyond ordinary morality, imposing his will on the world and answering to no one. Nietzsche had a name for something in that neighbourhood, and for a while it was the most misunderstood idea in his whole philosophy. People took it to mean exactly the sort of man Ozai is. The strong one. The one who dominates. The one out of everyone's reach. And that misunderstanding is where our wonder really starts. Because it turns out that reading of Nietzsche is almost perfectly wrong, and Ozai is almost perfectly the proof of why. But we're not there yet. First we should talk about what people think Nietzsche was on about, because you can't see why Ozai gets it wrong until you know what the right version was supposed to look like. So let's ease over to the philosopher for a bit and let Ozai sit back down in his shadows for a while. He's good at waiting. It's one of the few things he's genuinely good at. Right, the moustache man, Friedrich Nietzsche. If you've never read a word of him, you've still almost certainly absorbed him secondhand, because bits of him have leaked into everything. He's the God is dead bloke. He's the one edgy teenagers quote to sound clever. He's the philosopher people reach for when they want to justify not caring about anything. And most of what floats around under his name is a bit garbled, which he'd probably have hated, or possibly found funny. He had a sense of humour, contrary to his reputation. Let me start with the idea most people half know, because it's the one that matters most for Ozai. It's this word, the Übermensch. It gets translated as the Superman, or the Overman, and you can hear straight away why it got twisted. Say Superman to anyone, and they picture strength, dominance, a being above ordinary people who does whatever he likes. Say Overman, and it sounds like someone standing over everyone else, boot on the throat. That image has stuck for well over a century now. The Übermensch is the ultimate strongman, the one who's transcended the little rules the rest of us are stuck obeying. And here's the thing. If that were what Nietzsche meant, then Ozai would basically be a documentary. A man beyond good and evil, imposing his will on the entire world, answering to nobody, treating ordinary morality as a leash for weaker people. Tick, tick, tick. On the surface, Ozai is the Ubermensch of the memes, the Superman with the flaming beard. We'll get to why that reading falls apart, because it does. But first, I want to explain where this whole cluster of ideas comes from, because it's more interesting than the memes let on, and it's the sort of thing that's nice to think about, slowly, with your eyes shut. It starts with that famous line, "God is dead," and almost everyone who quotes it gets the tone exactly wrong. They say it like a triumphant little boast, a smug jab at the religious, as if the man were somewhere grinning about it. He wasn't. If anything, he was closer to alarmed. He didn't think he'd won an argument. He thought something enormous had quietly come loose, and that hardly anyone had noticed yet. Here's the way I've come to understand it. For a very long time in the world Nietzsche was writing about, God wasn't just a belief people carried around in their heads. God was the thing that fixed which way was up. Everyone shared a settled sense of higher and lower, of better and worse, of what a life was meant to be pointed towards, and all of it quietly took its bearings from that one fixed point. Right and wrong, the meaning of your days, the reason to get up in the morning and be decent to your neighbour, the sense that your small existence added up to something. People never even noticed they were leaning on it. The way you don't notice you're standing upright until the floor tilts under you. Then along comes a couple of centuries of science and reason and doubt, and slowly, gently, that fixed point goes dark. And Nietzsche, watching it happen, doesn't throw a party. He looks at where it used to be and asks a properly frightening question. Which way is up now? If the thing everyone took their bearings from is gone, then higher and lower and better and worse have nothing left to hang on, and a person can drift off in any direction at all without ever knowing they've started to fall. That drifting has a name: nihilism, the quiet suspicion that there's no point to any of it, no up left worth climbing towards. And Nietzsche spent his life, in a way, trying to work out how you keep your feet once the old direction is gone, and nobody can agree which way is up anymore. That's where the Ubermensch actually comes in, and it's so much gentler and stranger than the Superman image suggests. The Ubermensch for Nietzsche isn't the man who conquers other people. It's the person who can stand in that empty space, with nothing fixed overhead to take their bearings from, and no rulebook handed down to follow, and instead of falling apart, build their own meaning from scratch, create their own values, become the author of their own life, rather than a frightened member of a herd waiting to be told what matters. It's an inward thing, a thing you do to yourself, with yourself, about yourself. It has almost nothing to do with standing over anyone. There's a line of his I keep coming back to from a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is his big, strange, poetic one. He writes that man is a rope, tied between the animal and the Ubermensch, a rope stretched over an abyss. And I find that image genuinely lovely and a bit unsettling at the same time. You're the rope. Behind you, down at one end, is the animal, the creature just reacting to hunger and fear. Ahead of you, the other end, is this better version you might become. And underneath you, the whole time, the whole crossing, is the drop, the nothing. You cross anyway. That's the human situation as Nietzsche saw it. Not comfortable, not safe, but the crossing is the whole point. So already you can feel the gap opening up, can't you? The pop version of the Ubermensch is a destination, a trophy, something you arrive at and then lord over everyone from. Nietzsche's version is a crossing, a bridge, a thing you're always in the middle of, never finished with. One is about arriving on top of other people. The other is about getting yourself across an abyss. And that difference, that little crack between the two versions, turns out to be everything, because Ozai is a man who thinks he's arrived. He's up on his throne, on top of the whole world, looking down at everyone left in the abyss he thinks he's climbed out of. He's living the pop culture Superman fantasy in full, but if Nietzsche's right, and I think in this case he is, then a man who thinks he's arrived has actually just stopped crossing. He's frozen on the rope, and there's nothing more Nietzsche would pity than a person who mistook standing still for reaching the other side. We'll unpack how that works properly next, because there's this one specific idea, the will to power, that everyone gets wrong in exactly the way that makes Ozai make sense. It's the engine underneath all of this, and it's been misunderstood so badly and for so long that untangling it is half the fun. So let's talk about power and about what it actually means to want it, because it turns out that's a much weirder question than it sounds. The will to power. Even the phrase sounds like a threat, doesn't it? It sounds like a slogan you'd stick on a poster in a dictator's office. And that's most of the problem right there, because those 4 words have probably done more damage to Nietzsche's reputation than anything else he wrote. And they don't mean anywhere near what they sound like they mean. Let me give you the popular reading first, the wrong one, so we can enjoy watching it fall apart. The popular reading is simple. The will to power is the drive to dominate, to control others, to climb over people and end up on top. It's ambition with the gloves off. Under that reading, the whole of life is a competition, and the strong crush the weak, and Nietzsche's just describing the machinery of that and quietly cheering it on. Wanting power means wanting power over people. Obvious. Except it's wrong, and the real version is far more interesting. Here's what the man actually meant, as best as anyone can piece it together from what he wrote. The will to power isn't a drive to dominate other people. It's a drive to overcome yourself, to grow, to take the raw, chaotic, messy material of who you are, all your fears and appetites and weaknesses, and impose some shape on it, to become more than you were yesterday. He talks about it as a kind of creative force, the thing in you that wants to build, to master a craft, to turn your own inner chaos into something with form. The scholars who've spent their lives on this keep landing on the same word for it: self-overcoming. The will to power is, at its heart, power over yourself, not power over anyone else. And once you know that, a lot of things click into place. Because Nietzsche was quite clear, when you read him carefully, that wealth and armies and thrones were never the real markers of power to him. A man could rule the world and be, in the only sense Nietzsche cared about, utterly powerless, feeble, a wreck. Real power for him was self-command. The ability to discipline yourself, to face suffering without collapsing, to take your grief and your rage and your envy and channel all of it into making something rather than breaking something. The person who can do that is powerful. The person who can only knock things over is not, no matter how big the things are. Now hold that next to Ozai, and honestly, it's almost too neat. Because Ozai has will to power in enormous quantities. The wanting is off the charts, but it's pointed entirely, completely, in the wrong direction. Every ounce of it goes outward. Not one drop goes inward. He never overcomes himself. He overcomes cities. He overcomes nations. He overcomes his own children, which we'll get to, and it's grim. But the one person Ozai never masters, never even attempts to master, is Ozai. The clearest look you get at this is his big plan, right at the end. The comet's coming, this rare celestial thing that supercharges firebending to terrifying levels, and Ozai decides what he's going to do with all that borrowed power. He's going to fly a fleet of airships over the Earth Kingdom and burn the entire continent to ash. All of it. Not conquer it, not rule it. Burn it flat, everyone on it, the land itself gone. And here's the detail that gives me chills every time. He's copying his own family. 100 years earlier, when the comet last came, his grandfather Sozin used it to wipe out the air nomads in a single coordinated strike. Ozai looks at that genocide, the founding horror the whole show is built on, and his reaction is basically, right, my turn, but bigger. Listen to how he actually frames it though, because this is where Nietzsche would sit up. Ozai stands there and says that out of the ashes, a new world will be born. A world where all the lands are Fire Nation, and he is the supreme ruler of everything. Out of the ashes, a new world. He's dressing it up as creation. as building something, a new world, a fresh start, a rebirth. He's using the language of the creator, the maker, the one who brings something into being. But it's a lie, and it's a very particular kind of lie, the kind Nietzsche spent his whole life trying to warn people about. There's no creation in it. There's only destruction wearing a creator's mask. A world that's nothing but your own nation, made by burning everything that wasn't yours, isn't a new world at all. It's the old world with everyone else scraped off it. It's a bonfire that calls itself a sunrise, real creation, the kind the will to power is actually about. Make something that wasn't there before. Ozai just wants to be the last one, standing in a field of ash, and call the silence peace. And this is the thing I find genuinely sad about him, underneath all the menace. He has the raw drive of someone who could have overcome mountains inside himself. The wanting is real, and it's huge, but he's never once turned it on the only worthwhile target, which is his own character. It's so much easier to burn a continent than to sit with yourself and do the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone better. Burning things gives you an instant result. You can see the smoke. Self-overcoming gives you nothing you can point at. No smoke, no map you can conquer, just a person who's a little less ruled by their worst instincts than they used to be. Ozai chose the smoke. He always chooses the smoke. There's a comparison I keep reaching for, which is the way some people, when their life feels out of control, will reorganize a cupboard or repaint a room, some big visible act, rather than sit down and deal with the actual mess which is invisible and lives inside them. Ozai's version of that impulse is just scaled up to the size of a war. The whole conquest, the whole empire, the entire conquered world. You can read the lot of it as one enormous cupboard reorganizing exercise from a man who could not, would not, look inward for a single second. It's the biggest avoidance strategy in the history of that world. So that's the will to power, turned inside out and pointed the wrong way. Next, I want to look at the moment the show makes all of this painfully concrete. The moment Ozai's failure to master himself gets written, literally, onto the face of his own son. It's one of the hardest scenes in the whole series, and it's the clearest single illustration of the difference between overcoming yourself and overcoming someone weaker than you. So let's talk about the day of the duel. Picture a boy of 13, kneeling on the floor of a great hall, refusing to stand up. That's the scene. It comes to us secondhand, told by Iroh to a ship's crew in a first season episode called The Storm, and the way it's told, quietly, reluctantly, makes it land even harder. Zuko, 13 years old, had been allowed into a war meeting, a room full of generals planning the next move, and one of them proposes sacrificing a division of fresh Fire Nation recruits, their own young soldiers, as bait, throw them away to gain an advantage. And Zuko, being 13 and not yet ground down into whatever his father wanted him to be, speaks up. He objects. He says, "You can't just spend those men's lives like that. They're loyal. They deserve better." Now, by the rules of that room, Zuko has done something unforgivable. He's spoken out of turn in his father's court. And the punishment for that disrespect, the way Ozai chooses to frame it, is an Agni Kai, a fire duel, a formal one-on-one combat. Zuko, thinking he's going to face the general he spoke against, agrees, and then he turns and sees who's standing across from him. It's his father. Ozai has decided that the insult was to him, the Fire Lord, and so it's the Fire Lord the boy has to fight. And here's the moment that breaks me every time. Zuko won't do it. He drops to his knees. He won't raise his hands against his own father. He says he only had the Fire Nation's best interests at heart. He apologizes. He begs. He calls himself a loyal son, and he means it. He's not being defiant. He's doing the opposite of defiant. He's making himself as small and soft and sorry as a person can make themselves. Kneeling on the floor, pleading with the man who's supposed to love him. And Ozai burns him anyway, presses fire into the side of his son's face, and the boy screams, and Iro, telling the story, admits that he looked away. He couldn't watch. That's where Zuko's scar comes from, the one he carries for the whole rest of the series. His own father gave it to him, and then Ozai banished him on top of it, sent him away in disgrace, and told him he could only come home if he captured the Avatar, which everyone understood to mean never. The line Ozai says, or the sense of it, is the part I want you to hold on to, because it's so revealing. He tells the boy that he will learn respect, and that suffering will be his teacher. Suffering will be your teacher. And the reason for the banishment, the official reason, is that Zuko showed shameful weakness by refusing to fight. Weakness. Sit with that word for a second, because it's doing an enormous amount of work. In Ozai's world, the boy who wouldn't hurt his own father, the boy who defended some soldiers he'd never met because he thought their lives mattered, that boy is weak. Compassion is weakness. Refusing to raise your hand against your family is weakness. And the strong thing, the correct thing, the thing worthy of a Fire Lord, is to burn a child for it. This is the scene that shows you exactly what we were talking about before, the will to power turned the wrong way. Look at what Ozai does in that hall. He is presented with a chance to overcome himself. His son has embarrassed him, wounded his pride, made him look soft in front of his generals. And the genuinely powerful response, the self-overcoming response, would have been to master his own wounded pride, to feel the sting of it and not need to answer it, to be big enough that a 13-year-old's mercy couldn't threaten him. That would have taken real strength, the internal kind, the kind Nietzsche cared about. Ozai does none of that. He can't. He has no practice at it. So instead of overcoming himself, he overcomes his son, because his son is smaller and weaker and right there in front of him. He takes the thing he could not do to his own character, and he does it to a child's face instead. That's the whole tragedy of the man in one gesture. Faced with the hard internal thing, he reaches for the easy external one every single time. And here the easy external thing is disfiguring his own boy. And there's a horrible inversion buried in it that I don't think Ozai even notices. He calls Zuko's compassion weakness. But watch what compassion costs Zuko in that moment. It costs him his face, his home, his standing, years of his life. To hold on to his decency, the boy pays an enormous price, and pays it willingly. That's not weakness. That is one of the strongest things a person can do, holding a value when holding it hurts you that badly. Meanwhile, Ozai's so-called strength costs him nothing. He's the Fire Lord. Burning a kneeling child is the safest, cheapest thing in the world for him to do. There's no risk in it, no courage, no cost. So which of them is strong? The show knows the answer. It just lets Ozai keep believing the wrong one. I think about that a lot, the way cruelty dresses itself up as strength and mercy gets dismissed as weakness. Because it's not just a cartoon thing, it's one of the oldest cons going. The bully in any playground runs the same script. Hurting someone smaller than you feels like power, and it looks like power to anyone watching who's already frightened. But it's the exact opposite. It's what people do when they can't manage themselves, so they manage someone weaker instead. Ozai just has a nation's worth of fire to do it with, and a throne that means nobody can tell him no. And the really dark part, the part that lingers, is what he says about suffering being the teacher. Because there's a grain of something almost Nietzschean in it, and Ozai has got even that backwards. Nietzsche did think suffering could make you, that hardship faced properly could forge something in a person. But he meant your own suffering, met and used, and turned into growth. Ozai has twisted it into a license to inflict suffering on other people for their own good. He's not teaching Zuko anything. He's just hurting him and calling it a lesson. That's the move of a man who's heard that pain can be meaningful and decided it gives him permission to be the one handing it out. So that's the duel, the clearest window in the whole show into who Ozai is. Next, I want to pull back from the family for a bit and look at the wider machine Ozai is the head of. The whole nation and the story it tells itself, because Ozai didn't invent his own worldview out of nothing. He inherited a set of values that had been running for a century, and Nietzsche had a lot to say about exactly that kind of value system. So let's talk about masters and slaves and about the story an empire tells to feel good about itself. Here's something Nietzsche was fascinated by, and it's one of his ideas that holds up remarkably well when you point it at the real world. He reckoned that moralities, the sets of good and bad, right and wrong that people live by, aren't handed down from nowhere. They grow out of the kind of people who hold them, and he sketched out two rough types, two opposite flavours of morality, and gave them names that are, frankly, a bit inflammatory. Master morality and slave morality. Stay with me, because the names are worse than the idea. Master morality, in his telling, is the value system of the powerful, the confident, the ones on top. And the key thing about it is that it defines itself first. The noble type looks at himself, at his strength and his pride and his vitality, and says, "This is good. This is what good means. I am good." And then everything unlike him, the common, the weak, the timid, gets labelled bad, almost as an afterthought. Not evil, mind you, just lesser, beneath. Master morality thinks in terms of good and bad, the way you might think of a fine wine versus a cheap one. Not a moral judgment, so much as a ranking of quality, with the powerful naturally at the top. Slave morality is the mirror image, and it works the other way round. It's the value system that grows among the powerless, the ones being stepped on. And because they can't strike back at the strong, their morality starts from the outside in. It starts by pointing at the powerful and saying, that is evil. The strong one who tramples us, he's the villain. And therefore we, the meek, the humble, the patient, we're the good ones. Good and evil, rather than good and bad. It's a morality of reaction. It looks outward, finds an enemy, and defines itself as the opposite of that enemy. Now Nietzsche's got complicated feelings about both of these, and people flatten him constantly by pretending he just cheered for the masters and sneered at the slaves. It's messier than that, and we'll get into some of the mess. But for now, look at what the Fire Nation is, because it's master morality built into an entire civilization, running for 100 years. The story the Fire Nation tells itself is astonishing when you listen to it. They don't think of themselves as villains. Of course they don't. In their own telling, the Fire Nation is the greatest of the four nations, the most advanced, the most prosperous, the most vital. And the war isn't a war, not really. It's sharing. They're spreading their greatness to the rest of the world, whether the rest of the world asked for it or not. That's the propaganda Zuko grows up marinating in. We are the best, and it would be almost selfish of us not to give everyone else the gift of being ruled by us. It's master morality with the volume turned all the way up. We are good, therefore what we want is good, therefore taking everything is good. Sosin, the great-grandfather who started it all, framed the whole war exactly like this. He looked at the peace between the nations and decided the Fire Nation's success meant it had a duty, a right to expand and share that success. And by the time you get down to Ozai, 3 generations later, all the pretense of sharing has burned off, and you're left with the pure thing underneath. We are the strong ones. The world belongs to the strong. So the world belongs to us. Good and bad, with us permanently in the good column by definition, and everyone else is suffering just the natural cost of a lesser people meeting a greater one. There's a specific image of Nietzsche's that hovers over all of this, and I have to handle it carefully because it's the single most abused thing he ever wrote. In his book on the genealogy of morals, when he's describing the old noble warrior types, he calls them at one point the blonde beast. The blonde beast prowling for spoil and victory. And you can immediately see how a certain sort of person in the 20th century seized on those two words and ran somewhere horrifying with them. But here's what he meant, and it matters. The blonde beast is a lion. It's a metaphor for a beast of prey, and the blondness is the tawny colour of a lion's coat, not the hair colour of any human being. We know this because in the very same breath, Nietzsche lists who he's talking about, and it's Roman nobles, Arab nobles, Japanese nobles, Greek heroes, Viking raiders, all lumped together. Romans and Arabs and the Japanese are not what anyone would call blonde. He plainly means a type, a predatory noble type that shows up across every culture, and the lion is his shorthand for it. So the racial reading is a straightforward misunderstanding, or more often a deliberate misuse of a lion metaphor. And yet, I don't want to be too tidy about this because the honest truth is that the passage is dark, and pretending otherwise does Nietzsche no favours. When he describes the blonde beast, the noble type let off its leash, he talks about it going out beyond the boundaries of its own society and doing appalling things to strangers. Murder, arson, the lot, and coming back cheerful, like lads who've been on a spree. That's in the text. Nietzsche's describing it, half in admiration, as a kind of terrible innocent vitality. And that ambiguity, that whiff of, isn't there something magnificent about the predator, is exactly the crack that let people twist him later. So it's not that he was innocent and everyone else was evil. It's that he wrote something double-edged and then handed it unknowingly to the worst possible readers. We'll come back to those readers because it's a wild story. For now, the point is that Ozai is the blonde beast let off the leash, and the show even gives you the picture, almost literally. He is the predator that keeps its hierarchy neat and orderly at home, all rigid respect and formal duels and proper court manners, and then flies out beyond its own borders to rain fire on foreigners without a flicker of conscience. Inside the Fire Nation, rules and rank and ceremony. Outside it, the wilderness, where anything goes and the strong simply take. That's the master morality of a conquering people in its purest, ugliest form, and Ozai sits right at the top of it. Before we leave the subject of what Nietzsche feared, I should mention that the master morality tyrant wasn't the only kind of person he worried about. He had a second warning, pointing in nearly the opposite direction. And Avatar happens to give us a lovely example of that one too, so it's worth a small detour on the way past. The tyrant, the Ozai type, fails by reaching too far and too cruelly, but Nietzsche was just as bothered by the failure that comes from not reaching at all. He gave it a name, the last man, and by it he meant the person who's given up on becoming anything, who's quietly traded every difficult, worthwhile thing for comfort and safety and an undisturbed little life, and who calls that settling wisdom. The last man doesn't burn continents. The last man just wants to be cosy and left alone and never asked to grow. He's found his small comforts and quietly decided they're enough. And that soft, settled contentment is more or less the whole of him. Nietzsche thought a world made entirely of last men would be its own kind of death. A slow, warm, satisfied one, with nobody left reaching for anything, nobody crossing anything, everyone just settled comfortably on their side of the room, pleased. Now the Fire Nation is the loud failure, the tyrant's kind. But think about Ba Sing Se for a minute, the great walled city of the Earth Kingdom, and the thing that's quietly rotten underneath it. On the surface it's a haven, the one place in the world the war supposedly can't touch. But the way they keep it feeling that way is unsettling once you notice it. Inside those walls, you are simply not permitted to mention the war. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. That's the official line, and it's enforced by a secret police called the Dai Li, who quietly make people disappear when they threaten the comfortable illusion. The whole enormous city is held in a pleasant, managed, deliberately enforced ignorance. Nobody's striving, nobody's allowed to. They've swapped the truth for comfort and been firmly encouraged to feel grateful about the trade. That's the last man's world, more or less. Not cruel exactly, cosy, controlled. A place that's decided the highest possible good is that nothing ever disturbs anyone, and that will smother the truth itself to keep things that way. I think it's clever that Avatar tucks both failures into the same story. The Fire Nation is the danger of reaching too far, the will to power gone rotten and outward and hungry. Ba Sing Se, under the Dai Li, is the danger of not reaching at all, a whole population soothed into forgetting there's anything worth crossing an abyss for in the first place. 2 warnings, 2 directions, 1 show, sitting quietly side by side for anyone who cares to look. I won't go too far down that road tonight, because Ba Sing Se and The Last Man really deserve their own slow evening. And Ozai's the kind we came here for, but it's worth holding both in mind, because they frame each other rather nicely. Ozai is what happens when a person tries to make himself the whole meaning of the world by force. The Last Man is what happens when a person decides the world's already got quite enough meaning in it, thank you, and settles in for a nap. Nietzsche wanted us to walk the rope between the two, still crossing, never falling off either side. Ozai is just the loud, fiery way of falling off. And he's the one sitting on the throne with the airships, so he's the one we keep coming back to. This is roughly the point where the word warning starts to feel earned, isn't it? Because a whole civilization that's decided it's good by definition and everyone else is lesser, and that being lesser is reason enough to be conquered or killed, that's not a fantasy problem. We've seen it. And Nietzsche, for all the misuse of his ideas, was trying to understand how value systems like that get built, not cheer them on. But there's a twist to Ozai that I've been saving, and it's the most interesting thing about him, because for all his master morality posturing, I don't think Ozai is a master at all. I think underneath, he's something much smaller and sadder, and it's the thing Nietzsche despised most of all. So let's go looking for the weakness hiding inside the strong man. Here's the reading of Ozai that I've slowly become convinced is the true one, and it flips him inside out. On the surface, he's the ultimate master, confident, dominant, above it all. But scratch the surface and I think you find something Nietzsche had a very specific, very unkind word for, ressentiment, which is just the French word for resentment, and Nietzsche used the French deliberately to mark it out as a particular sickness, a particular way of being small. Ressentiment is the engine of slave morality, the reactive kind we talked about. It's the resentment of the person who feels wronged, who feels less than, and who can't act on it directly, so it curdles inside them and comes out as this need to tear down whatever they envy. The person full of resentment doesn't build, they react. Their whole sense of self is defined against something they resent. Nietzsche said, their soul looks obliquely. It loves hiding places and back doors and grudges nursed in the dark. It's the opposite of the noble type's straightforward, sunlit self-confidence. And the great irony I want to plant here is that Ozai, who postures as the noble master, is riddled with it. Think about where he came from, the story the show feeds you in pieces. Ozai is the second son, and in a monarchy, the second son is the spare. The throne was always meant for Iroh, the elder brother, the celebrated general, the heir. Ozai grew up in that shadow, the lesser prince, the one who was never going to matter as much no matter what he did. And I don't think he ever, for 1 second, made his peace with that. The whole shape of his life is the shape of a man who resented his position and schemed his way out of it. The show lays this out in an episode called Zuko Alone, and it's chilling once you piece it together. Iroh's beloved son, Lu Ten, dies during the siege of Ba Sing Se. Iroh, shattered by grief, abandons the siege and comes home broken. And Ozai, watching his brother at his absolute lowest, doesn't feel a flicker of sympathy. He sees an opening. He goes to their father, Fire Lord Azulon, and he suggests that maybe the succession should be reconsidered. Maybe Iroh, now childless and heartbroken, shouldn't inherit. Maybe the throne should pass to Ozai instead. He tries to step over his grieving brother's dead son to grab the crown, and it backfires at first spectacularly. Azulon is disgusted, not just at the ambition, but at the sheer heartlessness of it, angling for the throne while your brother mourns. So Azulon decides to teach Ozai a lesson about the pain of losing a child, and orders Ozai to kill his own son, Zuko, as punishment. That's the horror sitting underneath this whole family, by the way. That's the world these children are being raised in. What happens next is that Ozai's wife, Ursa, intervenes. She makes some kind of deal, and Azulon dies that same night. And the timing is not remotely a coincidence, and Ursa is banished. And Ozai somehow ends up on the throne instead of Iroh. The show is deliberately shadowy about the exact mechanics, but the shape is unmistakable. Ozai got the crown through scheming and, almost certainly, murder, riding on a sacrifice his wife made and paid for, while his elder brother was too broken by grief to fight for what was his. Now look at that story and tell me it's the story of a confident master. It isn't. It's the story of a resentful younger brother who could not bear being second, who watched for weakness and struck when he found it, who took by trickery what he was never given by right. That's resentment in its purest form. That's the oblique soul, the back door, the grudge nursed in the dark until it found its moment. Ozai isn't the lion. He's the man who envied the lion so badly he poisoned it while it was sleeping and then put on its skin. And this, for me, is the actual warning at the centre of Ozai, the thing Nietzsche saw coming from a long way off. It's not just that tyrants are cruel, it's that the people who grab hold of the aesthetics of strength, the domination, the contempt for weakness, the whole master morality performance, are almost never strong. They're the resentful ones, the ones who felt small and could never get over it, dressing their smallness up in a crown and a war and calling it greatness. Real self-mastery is quiet. It doesn't need to burn anything to feel real. The moment a man has to prove his strength by hurting someone weaker, you're usually looking at someone who is, underneath, terrified of his own weakness and desperate to put it somewhere else. You can test this against Ozai's behaviour, and it holds up disturbingly well. A secure, powerful man does not need to scar his 13-year-old for embarrassing him. That's not the act of someone above it all. That's the act of someone whose pride is so fragile that a child's mercy feels like a mortal threat. A secure ruler doesn't need to give his favourite daughter an empty title and crown himself something even grander, so nobody, not even his own family, can outshine him. Every one of Ozai's power moves is defensive when you look closely. He's not radiating strength outward. He's frantically shoring up a self that's terrified of being second again. The whole empire is a man managing his own insecurity with fire. There's something almost pitiable in it, and I say almost, because he's still a man who burns his son and plans a genocide. So let's not get carried away with sympathy. But the pity is real, at the edges. Here's someone who had every advantage, a prince of the most powerful nation alive, and he spent the whole of it running from a feeling of being lesser that he could have simply, at any point, turned and faced. That's the tragedy Nietzsche would have pointed at. Not the evil exactly, the waste. A man with a bottomless will to power who used every drop of it to avoid the one confrontation that might have freed him, the confrontation with himself. And this is where the whole thing loops back to that misunderstood philosophy, because there's a beautiful, grim irony waiting for us. The people in real history who did to Nietzsche's ideas what Ozai does to the idea of strength, who took a philosophy of self-overcoming and twisted it into a fantasy of dominating and destroying other people, were themselves exactly this kind of resentful, small, frightened lot playing dress-up as a master race. Ozai is the misreading made flesh, and the story of how that misreading happened in the real world to the real Nietzsche is one of the stranger and sadder tales in the whole history of philosophy. It's mostly a story about his sister and about what she did with his name once he could no longer stop her. So let's go and meet the philosopher himself for a while, and the person who did him the greatest wrong. Let me tell you about Nietzsche's sister, because this is one of those true stories that's almost too tidy, like something a scriptwriter would invent and then cut for being on the nose. Her name was Elizabeth, and she is very possibly the single most consequential bad sibling in the history of ideas. Friedrich and Elizabeth were close as children, but as adults they split hard, and they split over exactly the thing you'd hope Nietzsche would split with someone over. Elizabeth fell in with the German nationalist crowd of her day, the loud, beery, flag-waving sort that Nietzsche found embarrassing. And then she married a man named Bernhard Forster. Forster wasn't just an anti-Semite in the vague background way. He was a professional one. He organised some of Germany's first big anti-Jewish rallies. He got hundreds of thousands of signatures on a petition demanding the state register and restrict its Jewish citizens. He was, by any measure, one of the leading hate-mongers of his moment. Nietzsche was appalled. And this is the part I really want you to hold on to, because it demolishes the whole idea of Nietzsche as some proto-fascist. He didn't stay quiet to keep the peace. He wrote about his disgust, bluntly, in letters. He called anti-Semitism a lying swindle about race and said he refused to be associated with anyone caught up in it. He wrote in so many words, "This damned anti-Semitism is the reason for the break with my sister." He called Elizabeth, at one point, a llama who jumped away from him and gone off among the anti-Semites, which is both a savage insult and, I have to admit, a fairly funny one. Nietzsche had range, and it goes further, in a way that's almost unbearable, given what came later. In one letter to a prominent anti-Semite, Nietzsche is basically raging at him, and he ends with this cry that reads differently now than it did then. He asks, "How do you think it makes me feel when the name Zarathustra, his own beloved creation, gets mouthed by anti-Semites?" He couldn't stand the idea of his work being used by those people. He saw them coming, he named them, he wanted nothing to do with them. This is not a man who'd have found Ozai admirable. This is a man who'd have found Ozai's whole worldview nauseating. Bernhard and Elizabeth, by the way, took their dream of racial purity and tried to build it. They sailed off to Paraguay, of all places, to found a colony, a pure Germanic settlement in the middle of the jungle, all blue eyes and the right bloodlines. It was called Nueva Germania, and it was a disaster. The whole thing collapsed under debt and disease and mismanagement, and Bernhard eventually killed himself out there. So that's the caliber of person we're dealing with. This is who inherited Nietzsche's legacy. Because here's the cruel turn. Nietzsche's mind broke down in 1889. He collapsed famously in a street in Turin, and he spent the last 11 years of his life more or less absent, cared for, unable to write or defend a single word he'd ever put down. And who took control of his papers, his manuscripts, his notebooks, his entire literary estate? Elizabeth, the nationalist, the anti-Semite's widow, the very person he'd broken with in disgust. She came back from her failed jungle colony and made herself the keeper of the brother she'd fallen out with, precisely when he could no longer object to anything she did. And she did a great deal. She built a whole archive around him, curated his image, controlled who saw what. She sat on his more inconvenient writings, the ones where he laid into nationalism and anti-Semitism, and she pushed forward the bits that could be bent her way. Most notoriously, She took a pile of his unpublished notebook fragments, scraps, and jottings he'd never assembled into a book, and she stitched them together into a volume she called The Will to Power, and she presented it to the world as his great unfinished masterpiece, his crowning work. Except it wasn't a work at all. It was an anthology of loose notes, arranged and shaped by her and an assistant, given an order and an emphasis Nietzsche never chose. His actual intentions for most of that material are simply unknowable, because he never got to make them known. She made the choices and put his name on them. So think about what that means. For a huge part of the 20th century, the Nietzsche that people read, especially the people looking for permission to be monstrous, was substantially a Nietzsche edited by his anti-Semitic nationalist sister to suit her tastes. She promoted him relentlessly as a great patriotic German thinker. She sent her warm regards to Mussolini, calling him a reawakener of the values her brother supposedly stood for. And when the Nazis rose, she embraced them wholeheartedly, and they embraced her back, because a serious philosopher gave their thuggery a veneer of depth. When she died in 1935, Adolf Hitler himself turned up at her funeral. Let that sit for a moment. The philosopher who called anti-Semitism a lying swindle and broke with his own sister over it, ended up with that same sister being mourned by the leader of the Third Reich in a shrine she'd built to a brother who'd have despised every one of them. Now I want to be fair, because the tidiest version of this story, the one where Elizabeth alone invented fascist Nietzsche out of thin air, and her brother was a spotless innocent, isn't quite honest either. We talked about the blonde beast. The raw material in Nietzsche is wild, double-edged. He wrote provocations. He praised hardness. He sneered at pity and at the herd and at comfortable little people. If you go looking in his work for lines that sound dangerous, you'll find them, and you won't even have to dig. So it's not that the misreaders had nothing to work with. It's that they took a difficult, contradictory, deliberately unsettling thinker, cut away everything that didn't suit them, and handed the world a cartoon, a simplified, strongman Nietzsche. A Nietzsche who was all domination and no self-overcoming, all master and no crossing of the abyss. And that cartoon, that simplified fantasy of the philosopher of strength and domination and the master race, is Ozai. That's the connection I've been circling this whole time. Ozai is not what Nietzsche wanted. Ozai is what people made of Nietzsche when they wanted a license to conquer. He's the meme version, the poster version, the version his sister sold to fascists. The version where being an Übermensch means burning the world and standing on top of the ashes, instead of quietly, painfully, becoming someone better than you were. When the title of this whole thing says Ozai is what Nietzsche warned us about, this is the sharpest sense in which it's true. Nietzsche literally, personally, in his own letters, warned about the exact type of person who'd take his ideas and become an Ozai with them. He just didn't know that the first person to do it would be his own sister. Right, that's the heaviest bit of history done, and I've kept it as calm as I can, because it's a lot. Let me bring us back to the show, and to someone gentler, because the show doesn't just give us the warning, it gives us the alternatives, right there in the same family. And the first and best of them is a fat old man who loves tea more than anyone has ever loved anything. So let's talk about Iroh. Iroh is my favourite character in the whole show, and I suspect I'm not alone in that. He's a fat, cheerful, retired general who'd rather run a tea shop than an empire, who quotes proverbs, who cries at music, who treats a game of pie show with more reverence than most people treat a coronation. And he is quietly the deepest character Avatar ever produced. He's also, and this is the bit that matters for us tonight, the exact thing his brother Ozai could have been and refused to become. Start with the fact that Iroh and Ozai are handed almost identical raw material by life. Same bloodline, same father, the cold and brutal Azulon. Same nation, drunk on the same master morality story. Same century of war soaked into their upbringing. If you believe people are just products of what happens to them, then the two brothers should have come out roughly the same, and they came out as opposites. That's the whole quiet argument the show is making by putting them side by side. What happens to you matters, but what you do with it matters more. And crucially, Iroh isn't spared the suffering. If anything, he gets the worst of it. He was the heir, the celebrated general, the dragon of the West, the man who besieged Ba Sing Se, the greatest city in the world, and very nearly took it. He was everything the Fire Nation prized. And then, during that siege, his only son, Lu Ten, was killed, and it broke him. Completely. The great general walked away from the siege, walked away from the war he'd built his whole identity on, and came home a hollowed-out man carrying a grief that never fully leaves him for the rest of the series. Now here's the fork in the road, and it's the most important fork in the show. Two brothers both dealt terrible losses. Ozai's response to his brother's grief, as we saw, was to try to profit from it, to reach for the throne while Iroh was on his knees. But Iroh's response to his own grief is the thing I want to sit with, because it's a different way of being a person, and it lines up almost perfectly with an idea Nietzsche spent his life reaching for. He called it amor fati, love of fate. Amor fati is a hard idea and a beautiful one. It doesn't mean pretending the bad things were good. It doesn't mean being glad your son died, which would be monstrous. It means something subtler and much harder. It means turning towards your whole life, including the parts that gutted you, and being able to say yes to it. Yes, this happened. Yes, it was mine. Yes, it made me who I am, and I will not spend the rest of my days at war with the fact of it. It's the acceptance of everything, the losses included, not as things to be avenged or escaped or drowned in drink, but as the specific path that led to the specific person you now are. Nietzsche thought this was close to the highest thing a human being could manage. Not happiness exactly, something tougher and quieter than happiness. A kind of peace with the whole of your own story. And that is Iroh, isn't it? That is precisely what Iroh does with Lu Ten. He doesn't bury the grief and let it curdle into something cruel, the way his brother buried his own resentments. He carries it openly, gently. He lets it soften him instead of hardening him. There's a scene in a segment built entirely around the anniversary of Lu Ten's death, where Iroh sits alone at his son's memorial and sings to him and weeps, and it is one of the most tender things ever put in a children's cartoon, made more so because the voice actor himself passed away shortly after recording it. Iroh doesn't overcome his grief by defeating it. He overcomes it by loving his life anyway, tea and nephew and all. Because that's the other half of Iroh. Look at where all that will to power goes, the same drive his brother pours into conquest. Iroh pours it inward, and it comes out as this astonishing capacity to enjoy being alive. He makes tea like it's a sacred art. He notices small beautiful things. He mentors a furious, damaged nephew with endless patience, taking Zuko's rage and meeting it, over and over, with warmth. His whole dream, the thing he wants more than any throne, is to open a little tea shop and make people happy one cup at a time. And by the end of the show, he gets it. The Jasmine Dragon, the finest tea shop in Ba Sing Se, the very city his grief had once made him abandon. There's a lovely circularity in that. The place that took his son becomes the place he finally makes his peace. This is what the will to power looks like when you point it the right way, at yourself, at your own becoming, rather than outward at other people. Iroh has just as much drive and just as much strength as Ozai. Arguably more, because it took real strength to walk away from that siege and everything it meant to who he was. But he used it to master himself, to grow, to turn the worst thing that ever happened to him into a deep, warm, unshakable kindness. He's closer to Nietzsche's actual Übermensch than any other character in the show, and the joke, the lovely joke, is that he looks nothing like the fantasy. He's not a chiseled Superman standing over the defeated. He's a round old man offering you a biscuit and asking, sincerely, how you're feeling. That's what the real thing looks like. It looks like someone who's crossed the abyss and come out the far side gentle, and the two brothers standing next to each other tells you everything. Same start, opposite ends. One took his suffering and made a tea shop. The other took his and made an armada. One said yes to a life that had wounded him. The other said no to everything that wasn't under his boots. If you ever want a clean, wordless illustration of the difference between overcoming yourself and overcoming others, you could just put a picture of the Jasmine Dragon next to a picture of Ozai's burning airships and leave it at that. The tea shop is the stronger man's monument. It's just harder to see because strength that turns inward doesn't leave much smoke. There's one more character I want to spend proper time with before we get to the end, and it's the one who completes the arc Iroh points towards. Because Iroh is what Ozai could have been, but Zuko is what happens when someone starts out as Ozai's creation, marked and shaped and damaged by him, and then does the hardest thing in the entire show. He climbs out. He overcomes not just his suffering, but his own father living inside his head. So let's talk about the boy with the scar, all grown up, and the long, painful earned business of becoming a different person than you were raised to be. If Iroh is the man Ozai could have been, Zuko is the harder, more hopeful case, because Zuko doesn't start out wise. He starts out as Ozai's project, a boy built by his father to want the wrong things, marked by his father's fire, sent off chasing his father's approval like it's the only thing in the world worth having. And the whole long arc of the series is Zuko slowly, agonizingly unbuilding all of that and becoming a person his father never intended. It's the best redemption arc in animation, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise, gently over tea. Here's what makes Zuko's story matter so much for everything we've been talking about. He's the one character who does the thing Ozai never does, the self-overcoming, and the show is honest about how hard it is, which is why it works. Zuko doesn't wake up good one morning. He backslides. He makes the wrong choice at the worst possible moment, betraying Iroh and his own better instincts in Ba Sing Se, choosing his father's love over his own conscience, and it's painful to watch because you'd started to hope. He goes home to the Fire Nation, gets everything he thought he wanted, the throne room, the father's approval, the hero's welcome, and it's ash in his mouth. He's more miserable with the prize than he ever was chasing it. That's the turn, and it's beautifully Nietzschean without ever using a single one of his words. Zuko gets handed the exact life Ozai would call winning, and he discovers it's empty, because it was never his life, it was his father's, poured into him. The values weren't ones he'd chosen, they were ones he'd inherited, absorbed, been branded with. And the real work, the crossing of the abyss, is the terrifying business of throwing all of that off and working out what he believes when nobody's telling him, which is the loneliest thing a person can do. It's easy to obey your father. It's easy to obey the herd. It's the hardest thing in the world to stand in the empty space and build your own values from nothing, which is precisely what Nietzsche said the whole game was. And Zuko does it. He confronts Ozai, not with fire, but with words, telling his father to his face that he's been wrong about everything, that the Fire Nation's greatness was a lie, that he's leaving to help the Avatar undo the damage his family spent a century causing. He walks away from the throne. He chooses the harder, poorer, more dangerous path because it's the true one. That's a boy revaluing his own values, in real time, right there on the screen. Everything his upbringing installed in him, he takes out and examines, and piece by piece replaces with something he's decided to hold. Now let me come back to the scar, because it's changed its meaning by the end, and that change is the whole story in a single image. When Ozai gave Zuko that scar, it was meant to be a permanent mark of shame, proof of the boy's weakness, burned into his face so he'd carry the lesson everywhere. Suffering will be your teacher, remember. And for a long time, that's exactly what it is to Zuko. A badge of failure, the reminder of the day he wasn't good enough for his father. There's a small quiet moment earlier in the series where someone offers to heal it. Special water, spirit water, the kind that could take the scar away. And it's left hanging whether he'll do it. But by the time the story ends, the question has answered itself. And the answer is that Zuko keeps it. The scar stops being a mark of shame and becomes something more like a mark of survival, evidence of where he came from, and more importantly, of the fact that he left. He doesn't erase the past. He doesn't pretend Ozai never happened. He carries the proof of it and builds a better man on top of it anyway, which is Amor Fati again, the same move Iroh made with his grief. Say yes to your whole story, wounds and all, and become someone worth being regardless. And here's the line I keep landing on, the one that makes the whole father-son thing click for me. Zuko becomes the thing Ozai only pretended to be. Ozai postured as the strong one, the master, the man above it all, while secretly being a frightened, resentful schemer. Zuko, who was told his whole life that he was the weak one, the failure, the disappointment, becomes strong, in the only sense that counts. He masters himself. He overcomes not just his enemies, but the version of his father he'd been carrying around inside his own head for years, which is a far harder opponent than any firebender. The weak son turns out to be the strong man. The strong father turns out to be the weak one. The show swaps them quietly and never once spells it out, because it trusts you to feel it. I think that's why Zuko's arc lands as hard as it does, and it lands harder precisely because we've watched Ozai refuse the same work. You've seen in the father exactly what happens to a person who never turns inward, who takes the easy external road every single time. So when the son chooses the hard internal road instead, at enormous cost, against everything he was raised to be, it means something. It's not a boy being nice. It's a boy doing the single most difficult thing a human being can do, becoming other than what he was made to be. And the show has spent 3 seasons showing you the alternative sitting right there on the throne, smoking gently, having chosen never to try. There's a real generosity in how Avatar handles this, and it's worth sitting with for a second. The show could have made Zuko's goodness a matter of blood, some hidden noble nature that was always in him. It doesn't. It makes it a matter of choice, and work, and repeated failure, and getting back up. Zuko isn't good because he was secretly always good. He's good because he decided to be, over and over, on the days it would have been so much easier not to. That's a much more useful story to hand a child, or an adult, than the one where the hero was just born special. It says the crossing is available to anyone willing to make it. Even Ozai could have made it. He just didn't. Which brings us at last towards the ending. To the day the comet came and the whole thing finally broke open. And to what's left of a man like Ozai when the one thing he built his entire self around gets taken away. Because the show does something very deliberate with his defeat. It doesn't just beat him, it empties him. And what's underneath when the fire's gone is the last and saddest piece of this whole picture. So let's go to the fields under a red sky and watch the most powerful man in the world become an ordinary one. Picture the finest firebender of her generation, a princess who has never once lost at anything that mattered to her, sitting alone in a dim room and coming apart at the seams, seeing her long-banished mother's face in the mirror and arguing with it. That is where Azula ends up. She's the child who swallowed Ozai's worldview whole, the one who managed to be exactly what he wanted. And her story is, in some ways, the most frightening thing in the show. She's the warning we've been circling, made small and human and heartbreaking. She's what the ideology does to the person who believes it all the way down. Azula is the favourite. That's the first thing to understand about the two siblings. Where Zuko got the scar and the banishment, Azula got the approval, the training, the place at her father's side. She was the prodigy, the perfect little firebender, the one who never spoke out of turn in a war meeting because she'd already understood, young, exactly what her father valued and shaped herself into it. Fear, control, dominance, a total contempt for weakness. She learned Ozai's lessons better than Ozai ever taught them, and she was rewarded for it every step of the way. There's a childhood line the show gives her that says it all. This idea she absorbed from somewhere in that house, that fear is the only reliable way to make people do what you want. Not love. Love, in Azula's world, is for the losers. Fear is for winners. She was maybe 11 when she'd already decided that. And for most of the series, it works. That's the awful part. Azula is terrifyingly good at being what her father made her. She's a better strategist than Zuko, a better fighter, a better manipulator. She takes Ba Sing Se, the great unconquerable city, not by force but by sliding a knife of a plan into its heart. She wins where everyone else fails. If you were keeping score by Ozai's rules, by the master morality scoreboard of who dominates whom, Azula is the champion of the whole show. She's the ideology's finest product. The proof that it works. Except it doesn't work, not really. And the show is patient enough to show you the bill coming due. Because a self built entirely on fear and control has a fatal flaw. And it's this. It can only stand as long as everything stays under control. The moment the control slips, there's nothing underneath. No warmth to fall back on. No friendships that were ever really friendships. No love that would survive her being weak for even a second, because she taught everyone around her, deliberately, to obey her out of fear, rather than care for her out of affection. She built a fortress with no home inside it, and fortresses are wonderful right up until the day they're not, and then you find out there was never anywhere to live. Her unravelling, near the very end, is hard to watch, and I mean that as the highest praise for the writing. The two friends she'd kept in line through fear, Mai and Ty Lee, finally turn on her, precisely because she'd only ever ruled them through fear. And fear has limits, love doesn't. And once that first thread goes, the whole thing comes apart at speed. She starts seeing her banished mother in mirrors. She starts turning on everyone, banishing servants for imagined betrayals, growing more isolated and more paranoid by the hour. By the time of her final confrontation, this flawless prodigy, this champion of domination, is a sobbing, broken girl who's lost her grip on reality entirely. The ideology that made her unbeatable also left her with nothing to be, once she stopped winning. And here's the connection I can't stop thinking about. Azula's collapse is Ozai's collapse, just shown to you up close, with a face you can read. Ozai never breaks like this on screen, not really, because the show keeps him at that cold distance, right to the end. But Azula shows you the inside of the thing. She shows you what's underneath the master morality performance, the domination and the contempt and the fear-based control, and what's underneath is a terrified child who was never allowed to be anything else, whose whole self was propped up by winning, and who has nothing at all to hold on to when the winning stops. That is Ozai's inner life, made visible. He's just better at hiding it, and he never quite loses badly enough, until the very end, to have it exposed the way his daughter does. There's a comparison I keep making in my head, and it's to the way a house of cards can look for a while, exactly like a real building. From across the room, if it's built carefully, you can't tell. It has walls and height and structure. It fools people. And then one small breath of air, one nudge, and it's not that it gets damaged, it's that it turns out there was never a building there at all. Just cards balanced against cards, holding each other up through nothing but position. Azula is a house of cards that spent the whole series convincing everyone, herself most of all, that it was a fortress. And the wind, when it finally comes, doesn't knock her down so much as reveal she was never standing on anything. Nietzsche would have recognized her instantly, I think, and pitied her, which is a harder and kinder response than most people manage towards Azula, because she never had a chance to do the one thing that might have saved her, which was to become her own person rather than her father's weapon. Zuko got exiled, and horrible as that was, the exile is what saved him in the end. Being thrown out of that house away from Ozai's constant shaping gave Zuko the space to eventually work out who he was. Azula never got thrown out. She got kept close, kept useful, kept perfect, and so she never had the terrible gift of having to build herself from scratch. She was too successful to ever be forced to grow. The favourite child was, in the deepest way, the more trapped one. And that's the quiet, sad heart of what an Ozai does to the people around him, and why the warning isn't abstract. It's not just that a man like that hurts the people he hates, the way he hurt Zuko. It's that he does something almost worse to the people he loves, or thinks he loves. He makes them in his own image. He hands them his own hollow worldview, as if it were a gift, a crown, an inheritance. And the better they are at accepting it, the more thoroughly he destroys them. Zuko survived Ozai by being rejected by him. Azula was destroyed by Ozai by being embraced by him. If you ever needed proof that Ozai's idea of strength is a kind of poison, there it is in his own daughter, the one who drank the most of it, and had the least left when it was gone. So we've met the whole family now. The father who never crossed the abyss, the uncle who crossed it and came out gentle, the son who crossed it and came out free, and the daughter who was never allowed to try and shattered. 4 people, 1 bloodline, 1 poisoned inheritance, 4 completely different answers to the same question about what to do with a life. It's a remarkable bit of writing, honestly, that a children's show about magic benders is quietly staging one of the oldest debates in philosophy across a single, dysfunctional royal family, and mostly trusting you to notice on your own. There's just the ending left now. The comet, the red sky, the last fight, and the quiet, deliberate way the show chooses to defeat a man like Ozai. It would have been easy to just have the hero outpunch him, but the show goes a gentler and stranger way than that, and it's the sort of thing worth taking slowly. So let's go there and finish this where the show finishes it. The comet comes, and the sky turns the colour of a wound, and Ozai gets everything he ever wanted for about an hour. Fire-bending juiced up to god levels, a fleet of airships, an entire continent laid out below him to burn. He's flying over the Earth Kingdom, raining fire, exactly as planned. For a short stretch there, the master morality fantasy is fully, terribly real. The strong man above the world, unleashing himself on it. This is the version of the Ubermensch his whole life was aimed at, and for 1 hour he's living it. And then Aang shows up, and the show makes a choice about how to end this that I think is the most quietly radical thing in the entire series. Because here's the situation Aang has been agonizing over for the whole final stretch, and it's a hard one. Everyone around him, all his friends, all his advisors, the accumulated wisdom of his past lives, keeps telling him the same thing. You have to kill the Fire Lord. There's no other way. A man like Ozai cannot be reasoned with, cannot be reformed, cannot be left alive to try again. The math is simple and brutal. 1 life against the whole world. Kill him and it's over. And Aang can't do it. Not because he's naive, though people read it that way. Because he's an air nomad, the last one. Raised in a culture that held all life sacred. And killing Ozai would mean betraying the very thing that makes him worth saving the world in the first place. If he becomes a killer to win, then what exactly has won? A slightly nicer flavour of the same logic that Ozai runs on. The logic that says the strong get to decide who lives and dies. Aang refuses the choice, as it's been handed to him. He won't dominate, and he won't submit. And everyone tells him those are the only 2 options. So he finds a third one. And this is the bit I find beautiful, philosophically, underneath the cartoon of it. Aang doesn't outmaster the master. He doesn't beat Ozai at Ozai's own game, which would just prove Ozai's game was the right one all along. Instead, with some help from an ancient creature, a lion turtle from the dawn of the world, he learns a lost technique, energy bending. The ability to reach into the very source of a person's power and take it away, permanently, without killing them. And in the middle of that red-skied battle, Aang does exactly that. He strips Ozai of his firebending forever. Not his life, his fire, the thing Ozai built his entire self on top of. Think about what that is as an answer to the whole problem we've been discussing all night. Ozai's error, the error at the root of everything, was to believe that power meant power over others, domination, the strong imposing their will on the weak. That was his whole religion. And Aang defeats him, not by being a bigger dominator, but by inventing, in the moment, a completely new kind of power that sits entirely outside that logic. A power that neither kills nor conquers, that refuses the whole dominate or be dominated frame and does something nobody in that world had thought of in centuries. That is, if you want to get Nietzschean about it, the creation of a new value. A new thing brought into a world that thought it had run out of options. Aang, the gentlest character in the show, ends up being the one who does the thing Nietzsche said was the highest human act. He faces a situation where the old rules only offer him bad answers, and instead of picking the least bad one, he makes a new rule. He crosses the abyss and builds something on the far side that wasn't there before. And now look at what's left of Ozai when the fire's gone, because this is the saddest and most telling image in the whole story. Here is a man who minutes ago was the most powerful ruler that world had ever known, master of something like 8/10 of the planet. And with his bending taken, he's just a man, an ordinary middle-aged man, lying in the dirt under a fading red sky, with nothing. And here's the thing that makes it land. There's nothing underneath. When you take the fire away from Ozai, there's no inner life left to fall back on. No wisdom, no relationships worth the name, no craft, no love, no self he ever bothered to build that wasn't just the power itself. He poured every drop of his will to power outward, into domination, into fire, into the throne, and none of it inward, into becoming an actual person. So when the outward stuff is stripped away, the cupboard is bare. He's a king reduced to nothing, and the nothing was always there, just hidden behind the flames. Now hold that image next to another one, because the show basically dares you to make the comparison. Ozai ends the series in a prison cell, stripped of everything, hollow. And earlier, remember, Iroh spent time in a prison cell too. And what was Iroh like in captivity? Serene. Doing push-ups, drinking his tea, keeping his dignity, entirely himself. Because Iroh's self was never made of thrones or fire in the first place. You could take everything external away from Iroh, and there'd still be a whole rich person left. Because he'd spent his life building that person on the inside where nobody could confiscate it. Take everything external away from Ozai, and there's a hole. Same family, same cell, more or less. Opposite men. One of them brought his whole world into that cell with him, because it lived inside him. The other one lost his entire world the moment someone took his fire, because he'd never built a single thing that couldn't be taken. That, right there, is the difference between the two kinds of power we've been talking about all night, shown to you without a word of philosophy. Power over others evaporates. The instant someone stronger, or cleverer, or gentler, and more inventive comes along and removes it. Power over yourself is the only kind nobody can take, because it isn't held anywhere but in you. Ozai bet his entire existence on the first kind. And he lost the bet the way everyone who makes that bet eventually loses it, completely and all at once, with nothing left over. There's a final little detail that I think is the show's last quiet twist of the knife, and it's almost tender in its cruelty. The last we really see of Ozai, he's in that cell, and Zuko, now Fire Lord, comes to visit him. And Ozai, the man who once looked down on his son from a throne of fire and called him a weakling, now looks up at that same son from behind bars. The whole geometry of them has flipped. The father who spent his life above everyone is below, looking up. The son who spent his life beneath his father's contempt is standing free, whole, a better man and a better ruler than Ozai ever was. And Ozai has nothing to say that matters, no power to threaten with, no fire to burn with, just questions and bitterness, and a life that added up in the end to a hole in the ground where a person should have been. He got exactly as far as domination could take him, which turned out to be a cell with a view of his own son's success. So that's the ending. Not a triumphant one exactly. Nobody stands over Ozai and gloats. The show is too wise for that. It just quietly, patiently empties him out and lets you see what was always inside, which was nothing, and lets you compare it to the fullness of the people who chose the other road, and then it moves on, the way life does, to the work of rebuilding a world that a man like that spent a century trying to burn. Which leaves us with just one thing left to do, which is to sit for a minute with what all of this adds up to, and why a cartoon fire lord and a mustachioed philosopher who never met and lived worlds apart keep pointing at the same quiet truth. So let's wind it down, gently, and I'll tell you the one thought I keep coming back to whenever I think about Ozai. Here's the thought I keep coming back to, and it's not really about Ozai being evil. Everyone knows Ozai's the villain. That's the least interesting thing about him. The thing I find myself turning over, late at night, is how ordinary his mistake was. How human. How easy. Because strip away the fire and the throne and the airships, and Ozai's whole error boils down to one confusion, and it's a confusion that a lot of perfectly normal people make on a much smaller scale every day. He confused ruling other people with mastering himself. He confused being feared with being strong. He confused destroying things with building them, right down to standing over a burning continent and calling it a new world. And underneath all of it, he confused running from his own weakness with overcoming it. He spent a whole life and a whole empire's worth of power avoiding the one small, unglamorous, difficult thing that might have made him into someone. And it's such an easy trade to make, isn't it? The outward thing is always right there, always tempting, always giving you that instant hit of feeling powerful. The inward thing is slow and quiet, and gives you nothing you can show anyone. Ozai just made that trade bigger and more completely than almost anyone ever has. And that's really what Nietzsche was warning about, when you clear away all the noise and the misuse and the century of people getting him backwards. He wasn't warning us about cartoon supervillains. He was warning us about a temptation that lives in the middle of being a person. The temptation to skip the hard internal crossing and reach for the easy external win. To mistake power over others for the real thing, which is power over yourself. He built this whole strange, difficult philosophy, trying to point people towards the crossing, towards the slow becoming, towards creating your own meaning in a world that stopped handing it to you. And the bitter joke of his life, the one we spent time with earlier, is that the people who most loudly claimed his name, starting with his own sister, took that philosophy of inward becoming and turned it into precisely the outward, dominating, destroying thing he was warning against. They built an Ozai out of a man who was trying to warn us about Ozais. You couldn't write it. Well, someone did, eventually. They just made him a Fire Lord. But here's the part I don't want to leave you on a grim note about, because the show itself refuses to leave you there, and I love it for that. Avatar doesn't just hand you the warning and walk off. It hands you the warning and, in the very same breath, in the very same family, hands you every alternative to it. That's the generosity of the thing. Ozai is never the only option on the table. He's just the loudest one. Because right there beside him the whole time is Iroh, who got dealt a loss worse than almost anyone, and answered it not with fire, but with tea and patience and an open heart, who took the exact same bloodline and the exact same wound, and turned it into gentleness. And there's Zuko, who started as Ozai's creation, marked and shaped and broken by him, and who did the single hardest thing a person can do, which is to become someone his own father never intended, choosing his values one painful decision at a time until he was free. And there's even Azula, who's a warning of her own, the softer and sadder kind, showing you what the poison does to the one who drinks the most of it. 4 people, 1 family, 1 inheritance of fire and cruelty and cold, and 4 completely different answers to the question of what to do with a life. The father who never crossed, the uncle who crossed and came out kind, the son who crossed and came out free, the daughter who was never let anywhere near the crossing at all. And the quiet thing the show's telling you by lining all 4 of them up like that is that none of it was fate. That's the hopeful bit buried under all the darkness. Ozai wasn't doomed to become Ozai. He had a brother who proves it, standing right there making tea, same start, opposite end. Ozai could have been Iroh. He had every chance. He just kept choosing the fire, kept choosing the outward easy thing, kept refusing the crossing, day after day after day, until the refusing was all that was left of him, and there was nothing underneath when the fire finally went out. His tragedy wasn't that he was born a monster. It's that he was born with the same shot at becoming someone that his brother had, and he spent the whole of it running the wrong way. I mentioned an image near the start of all this, and I want to bring it back one last time because it stayed with me, and maybe it'll stay with you. Nietzsche said man is a rope, stretched between the animal and something better, over an abyss, and the whole point of that image is that you're always on the rope, always mid-crossing, never quite arrived, never quite fallen, just making your way across the drop, one careful step at a time, for as long as you've got. Ozai's mistake in the end was thinking he'd reached the far side. He looked around from the top of his empire and decided he'd made it. He'd arrived. He was the finished Superman, standing over a conquered world. But you never arrive. That's the thing. There is no far side you get to stand on and lord over everyone. There's only the crossing. And a man who thinks he's finished crossing has just stopped, frozen out there in the middle over the nothing, mistaking standing still for having got somewhere. That's Ozai, stopped on the rope, convinced he'd won, while his brother and his son quietly kept walking. I think that's why this reading of him has got its hooks in me, and why I wanted to spend all this time on a villain most people write off as flat. Because he's not flat, not really. He's a warning wearing a crown. He's the easy mistake made enormous, and the show is kind enough and wise enough to surround that warning with living proof that the mistake was never the only option. You could take everything I've said tonight and shrink it right back down to human size, to your own ordinary life with no fire in it, and it would still be true. The people who need to dominate are usually the ones who never learned to sit with themselves. The strength that has to be proven by hurting something smaller isn't strength, and the only power nobody can ever take from you is the quiet, inward, unglamorous kind you build by slowly becoming someone you can stand to be. Iroh knew that. Zuko learned it. Ozai went to a prison cell without it. And a philosopher with an enormous moustache tried to tell us all as much over 100 years ago, before anyone twisted his words into the very thing he was afraid of. Anyway, that's where I'll leave it for tonight. There's more I could say about this family, and probably will another time, because I've got a whole other tangent brewing about Azula that deserves its own slow evening, and about Aang and that third path he found, the refusal to dominate or submit, which I think is quietly the most important idea in the entire show. But those are for another night. For now, it's enough to have sat with the empty man under the red sky for a while, and with the tea-drinking brother who chose the other road, and with the strange, sad, brilliant philosopher who saw the whole thing coming. Thanks for keeping me company through all of it. Rest well whenever you get there. And if your mind's still turning any of this over, as you drift off? Let it. It's good company, a thought like that.